Well, greetings, friends, and welcome to the Gospel Underground Podcast. This is episode number 152, Answers, #God. Jesse, we're broadcasting live for us from the worldwide headquarters here in Blacksburg, Virginia. Brother, it is good to see you. It's good to be back. We've had a little bit of a break on the podcast of you and me together.
You've been rolling.
But people have been rolling, right? Tommy was on a roll. My friend David Ritchie was on a roll for the Christian nationalism. Hopefully, as everyone voted, they voted in conscience and not in idolatry. Yesterday, in the great state of Virginia, we voted. And I, got a little pensive, reflective, sitting in my backyard looking at the leaves fall and my kids getting older. Jesse, we did something last week on seasons. But today we are in our next series, Answers. This comes out of where we've been kind of in Wise Witness and Raising Culture.
Respectful witness. Yeah.
So coming out of that in Answers, we had a lot of friends who were like, hey, why don't you get into some of that? And so we're going to get into some of that, good answers to good questions over the next several months in an amateur kind of way, and maybe in
you're more than an amateur. I think when you said we had a lot of friends asking. I think what you really meant is you had a lot of friends asking. I had friends asking me, why don't you ask Reed to get into that a little bit more? And I said that I think that's fair. I think that's fair.
Well, Jesse, I'm wearing a purple hat today.
Sewanee.
If you're watching
School of the South.
University of the South, Sewanee Tigers.
That's what it is, University of the South.
Just had their best women's, they're still going, best women's soccer season in the history of the school.
Is it possible? Is it just possible? Let's talk about tracing an argument here. Is it possible that they had their best season in history because of a certain midfielder?
Well, I mean, part of it, you can't say she wasn't contributing. I mean, and maybe their head coach, I said, hey, you guys, man, great. You won everything this year. And their new assistant coach was like, hey, man, you come in, you win everything. He's like, no, it's because of your daughter. So we're proud of her. She did well. We watched them win the regular season, kind of beat their big rivals on the other team's field. They won their conference championship. And now I got to drive to St. Louis.
You get to drive.
I get to drive. Can't afford last minute plane tickets for both me and my wife, Jesse. We're not a prosperity ministry here. What I'm saying?
You'd be willing to send out some blessed towels that people send send some seed money in. But
miracle blessing oil for our private jet to the NCAA Division III soccer tour. No, we're not doing that. We are driving 10 hours to St. Louis. Lord willing, we'll get to see them at least have one game. Hopefully more than one. We'll see.
I think at least two.
Yeah, that'd be great if they could get two.
Maybe pull off the upset.
There's 468 or something like that Division III women's soccer programs, and so this is the last 64. Everyone's really good at this point. There's no cake in there. Well, maybe there's a few games that'll be easy for some. We don't have those. We have two pretty tough ones. If we win the first one, the second one, I think we have the out and out top team in the country, Washington University of St. Louis. So we'll see how it goes, Jesse. But I'm excited for that. So that's why we got purple today. That's why I got my dad hat on. This is a very most dad looking hat today. And you had on your house gear.
I'm black on black right now because I wanted to honor you. I knew for certain you'd be wearing black. There was no doubt. Yeah, I got the Bonhoeffer House gear on.
And never do Just for Men on your beard because it looks incredible. It looks incredible.
It's all on theme. It's the black and white.
Gray.
It's the black and white on the shirt and in the beard. And I've started to use oil.
Yeah, beard oil.
Beard oil.
Like the beard of Aaron. It's like the anointing.
That's right. I anoint myself, though, so I don't know how that works.
I anoint my beard with oil. Well, Jesse, today we are coming into this series, Answers, and #God today we're going to look at. But this comes out, of course, our last series that says, but, in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy. Be prepared to give a reason or give a defense for anyone to ask you for the reason, the hope that is in you, and do so. And our word from our last series was to do so with gentleness and respect, right? Respect for other human beings. And so we're taking from the episode on Answers the roadmap for the next several months. So we said that you want to be able to give good answers for what we might call basic Christian doctrines or teachings. So Why do you believe in God? We'll hit that today. Why do you believe Jesus rose from the dead, the hinge point of history? Why do you think Jesus is the Savior we all need, right? The particularity of the gospel and the saving Messiah, Jesus Christ. And why do you trust the Bible? So there's our 4 episodes there. And then we'll go into some cultural apologetics that are things particularly suited to our cultural moment. You need both. I think there's a lot of interest many times to the cultural issues because everybody's fighting about those. But without the solid foundation of the undergirding doctrines of Christianity, which come to us through God's word, we have nothing to preach. And certainly when somebody asks us a question, why do you believe that? Many times we don't know what to say. And so hopefully, Jesse, we might be a little bit helpful at least in these issues. Now, the cultural issue, so we will connect with, is we're going to hit why is the church so political? And we're going to answer that question honestly, like not in just in the dismissive way, like, oh, don't be political. We're going to say why maybe you should care about political. And is there a way to do political? David Ritchie certainly will be helpful to us there. Racism and Christianity, that mingled history that's plagued the human race and the church. Environmental concerns of the creation. And then what I'm looking forward to, Jesse,
aliens,
other interstellar planetary beings. I kind of wish Thrawn from the Star Wars universe. Jesse, in all these car trips I've done to soccer and ministry, I've been reading these Thrawn books. So yeah, I'm hoping he's real. Maybe he's out there. No, so we're going to talk about aliens, and then we'll bridge into sex and gender, which will be our next series that we'll hit in 2024, as advertised earlier. But we're taking this brief hiatus into answers. So Jesse, have you ever been asked, why do you believe in God?
I have been asked that. And one of the things that I think, just to agree with you, Reed, that why this is so important is that if all we're doing is addressing the kind of cultural hot button issues, or even really the cultural objections, I think sometimes we can end up presenting Christianity as if it's one option among many options in dealing with cultural injustices, or so. All that to say, I think that the gospel of Christ and the reality of Jesus and God is more than just one option that you're trying to sort of position as like the best option.
Yeah, particularly when our cultural moment is one that, like 31 flavors for everything, and we think everything's a choice. Nothing's up to anyone outside of ourselves, right? We determine reality. We determine our beliefs. We find your own truth. You dance to your own music, all of that. But in reality, if there is things outside of us, right? Particularly one who made us, maybe that God's voice and view and opinion might matter in our world.
That's right.
We're obsessed with our choices. Yeah.
And if we're going to engage with those things, we really have to take a step back. And I like to do this when I have conversations with people. And this is why I have been asked, why do you believe in God?
Yeah.
To say, well, before we can answer that, I think we really have to answer the question, is there a God? Because if there is a God, if you agree with me that there is a God, then really we get into like, all right, well, we have to figure out, what does he think about this?
Yes.
Who is he? What kind of God is he? But yes, I've been asked, why do you believe in God?
Yeah. Well, as we begin this question, why do you believe in God? I want to make a few rejoinders. First of all, our belief in God does not affect God's existence ontologically at all. In other words, we're not saying that God exists because we conceive him in our minds, right? Our belief is that God is real, the realest of reals that there is. And so,
I'm gonna press you, Reed, because you're using words that
just casually using the word.
Well, you say ontological, and obviously there's an ontological argument.
Yeah.
But what do you mean? What does ontological mean?
Ontology is the study of being or existence, things that are real, right? Sometimes the word metaphysics, ontology can be thrown around almost synonymously. I'd say they're a little different, but almost synonymously. So ontologically speaking, that means God has existence. Mm-hmm. Now, Christian philosophers say God is pure existence, right? Yeah. Pure. Thomas Aquinas would say pure actuality. There's no potential or becoming, or God is the isness. And obviously Exodus 3, God even gives his covenant name, right? To
I am.
He calls himself the I am, which is kind of interesting when you connect that. So rejoinder, God is real. Our belief in him or not does not determine that. But there might be good reasons to believe that. Secondly, there are, and I want you guys to feel this, it's like there are arguments and when I use the word argument, I mean like ways of thinking to present a truth, right? There are arguments that are philosophically rich, very deep in, say, the analytical philosophy of religion. And some of these arguments we'll use today or share today are very sturdy and would hold up. I mean, I was asked by a philosophy professor at Virginia Tech when I was kind of taking philosophy for fun years ago, why do you believe in God? And we jumped in, man, right? So there are things that are philosophically rich and solid and sound and clear, rigorous philosophical arguments, but there's also stuff that's just practically helpful. And really on our podcast, we want to get to that. So jump on me, man, if I say some undefined word or whatever. And so,
and when I'm trying to help listeners like me who may not take a philosophy class for fun. And so our conversations might not be with a philosophy professor.
That's right.
It might just be with like mom.
And so, exactly. And so we're going to give you guys language, both types of language. We're going to give you the philosophical language. So we might use the word here in a moment, the cosmological argument. And then we're also going to say, hey, we're here. Right? Well, why do you believe in God? We're here.
We're here. That's right.
Why is this right?
How did we happen? Right. So let me kind of jump to you now, Reed, to say the cosmological argument. I find that to be a really compelling intellectually for me. It's just like, well, this makes sense.
Yes.
And I have not engaged with another answer that makes more sense.
That's right.
And so
that's right.
So unpack it in a way that like
so if you're following along, our first reason why we believe in God is we are here, or cosmos, right? The whole world, the universe, existence. It begins with the brute fact that we're here, right? And all of us, now there are some of you sophisticated philosophical people might doubt your own existence, but even Descartes tried to do some ninja tricks with that to say, well, because I'm
the one thing
I
can't,
that's the cogito ergo sum, or I think therefore I am. But cosmological thinking, it's a word, about the cosmos, right? It's a thinking about the universe and its existence, and there's different kinds, Jesse, of cosmology, starting with the universe, the fact of existence, and reasoning to its cause, or reasoning its existence being explained by something else. And that's very important because there are things that people would call a horizontal cosmological argument, which reasons about causation or the why something is. And probably the most famous of those, and certainly contemporary philosophical reasoning, because of philosophers like William Lane Craig, is what's called the Kalam cosmological argument, which goes back, I forget which medieval Arabic Muslim philosopher, Al-Ghazali, I believe. Don't quote me on that. Which starts with existence and reasons to the cause of the universe. And obviously there's a very sophisticated modern one that deals with modern scientific understandings of both cosmology, Big Bang cosmologies, inflation of the universe, all these things. But here's the simple horizontal cosmological argument, Kalam version, right? If something, and guys, this is not like rocket surgery, right? This is pretty basic, right? If something begins to exist, and that's very important to use the word begin here. If something begins to exist, it has a cause. Very hard to object to this.
Yeah.
Oh, and by the way, this is what philosophers call a deductive argument. If the premises are true, the conclusion has to follow. Mm-hmm. So people have to get out of this. So if something begins, so if I were sitting here and all of a sudden a little aluminum can of apple, Fuji, apple, pear, Celsius hopped up energy drink appeared on a table, right? Yep. It wasn't here before. Yep. And all of a sudden, the boom, energy drink is on the table. Your valid question would be what?
Where did that come from?
What the what?
Right? How did that? Who put that there?
That's right. And I would think, did my wife do that? Because she knows I like apple, Fuji, apple, pear, Celsius, right? Which my son makes fun of me for drinking.
I love those, by the way. When you said it, I started looking around thinking,
man, do we have those?
Are there any around here?
A lot of caffeine. So if something begins to exist all of a sudden, comes into existence, right?
We would not accept it without wondering where did it come from.
Yeah, we didn't just say, well, guess it's just been there
always
forever.
been there.
Well, I guess nothing did that, right? So if something begins to exist, it's right to ask about a cause. Now, if something exists, we don't know. It could have been there forever. What do we know about it? But if something begins to exist, it has a cause. Now, the second premise is very simple as well and complex when you get in making evidence for it. The universe began to exist. Now, this was greatly aided in the 20th century in physics, in cosmology, astrophysics, when we started looking at shifting of light, the light spectrum, particularly the redshift and microwave background radiation of the universe. So you can look and see how light moves. And so what we noticed that there seemed to be this background radiation that resembles what in layman's term is like resembles the aftershock of an explosion. And so that's where Big Bang cosmology comes from, which actually says that the universe began to exist. There is a time equals zero where space-time comes into existence and then expands over time. Now, there's all sorts of complex math and physics involved with that. We don't need to get into that here today. But a lot of times people get upset about the Big Bang. Christians, they're like, well, we didn't come from no bang. We came from God. Well, Big Bang theory was actually super massively helpful to those who believed in God because it got rid of this idea of a steady state universe, that the universe has always existed. In other words, it began to exist. And then there's some other arguments for why the universe began to exist related to time and successive moments in time. Because if there is an infinite past, the present never gets here. It gets real fun. Or for, with examples like if you have a hotel with an actual infinite rooms, you check someone in. How many are empty? Well, it's still infinity, right? So these ideas are very important to show that time began, progressed to the present, moves into tomorrow, and this is the way the universe is, and it has a beginning. If anyone ever says that the universe is a bazillion, whatever years old, they are acknowledging its beginning. And now when you do that, if something begins to exist, it has a cause. The universe began to exist. Well, the conclusion then follows. Therefore, the universe has a cause. Now, it doesn't say it's, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? But it certainly would be a non-material. It's not space-time energy because that came into existence, non-temporal, uncaused, and then what philosophers call necessary, right? So you don't get into this, well, what caused this? What caused God? Well, nothing did. God is what philosophers call necessary being. So that's a very simple one that I think anybody can say. Hey, something begins to exist, it has a cause. The universe began to exist, so I think the universe has a cause. I think that cause is God, a creator, right? As we see, Jesus talked about God the Father, creator of heavens and earth, right? That's what we believe. Very simple.
I showed you this before we recorded, but I was watching a comedian on Netflix recently, and he's got this bit about how someone who disbelieves in God, and especially with a kind of pride of like, oh, you believe in God, has to still believe that this all came from nothing.
That's right.
And the kind of religious leap of faith it is to think that nothing caused everything.
That's right.
It's a miracle.
Yeah.
It's a miracle of creation.
Yeah.
And of course the bit turns to
we were going to play it, but he uses the Lord's name pretty harshly. There's some language at the end. It's really funny, guys. We may put it in the show notes, but he basically talks about the magical nothing.
The magical nothing that creates everything, and that then you return to upon death, which is really just sort of
like
heaven
going to God, going
to your maker.
Yeah, and I like Aristotle, the ancient Greek philosopher's definition is nothing is that which rocks dream about, right? Because we're talking about not quantum fluctuations of the early energy field of the universe, nothing becoming everything. We're talking about philosophical nothing, ontology, has no being, is no thing, right? Yeah. Nothing causes nothing, nothing ever could. So that's very important. Now, vertical cosmological arguments, I don't know, man. I don't want to get into this too much. Thomas Aquinas did a good on this. This gets into some pretty technical definitions of contingency and necessity. But this is pretty simple, guys. Contingent things, if something is contingent, its existence is dependent upon something else. So if we were to say, why is there a Jesse Fury? Well, there's probably some parents involved that you derived your existence from. And so the argument for this says that all things in this world are either contingent or they're necessary, right? They just exist, right? Necessarily. and that all things in this world are contingent. Now, if you can think of, guys, something that doesn't owe its existence to something else, right? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You getting where we're going here?
Yep.
Like everything we're looking at, all these leaves outside, this light has a factory behind it or something that has stuff. All the stuff has stuff.
Rocks, leaves, all of it.
Exactly, exactly. That's the old joke about Nietzsche saying he could make, or a scientist say he could make everything, without God. And the scientist said, "Hey, give me some dirt." And God said, "No, get your own dirt."
Yeah.
Right. So the idea is that everything is contingent. Now, if everything in this universe is contingent, it seems to be, and I don't think this is what people call a fallacy of composition, that if everything in the world, period, is contingent, then the world itself is dependent on something else. So the universe is not necessary. It could not exist. In fact, there was a time then when it didn't, so we know this. And so this would then reason that there has to be some necessary being or entity for the universe existence, not its beginning.
Right.
This has nothing to do with temporal causation, but its very existence. And this is concords really well with the biblical witness, like in the book of Hebrews, that God upholds the universe by the word of his power, right? So, starting with existence, we can say, I believe in God because we're here, and it desires an explanation. Unless you have no questions, if you don't want to ask questions, science is done, any learning is done. So that's the first line. Second line, Jesse, has been popular at various times in different ways throughout history, where we'd say, why do you believe in God? Well, things seem to be designed and purposeful. And you can tell us what teleological, that's our big word. You can tell us what that is.
Telos is an aim or an end. So teleological would be that it is created with a clear design.
Purpose design, yes. And so this has gone in and out of fashion throughout the ages, so to speak. In a Newtonian physics kind of way, a guy named William Paley in a book called, I think, Natural Theology, made this divine watchmaker. This is the 19th century, where the model at the time was not computers and things like that. It was more like a clockwork universe that things worked according to physical laws at a macro level, big level, right? You throw rocks up and they fall. The Newton's laws of physics, which had taken off and later birthed all the Industrial Revolution, all the things we see, right? So Paley's argument, if you came upon a watch in the wilderness, you're walking around, you see a pocket watch or something, you would think someone made that, right? And it's a reasonable inference. Now, he took heat after, Darwinism, because Darwinism, at least, evolutionary, naturalistic Darwinism, because there's, versions, let's say, naturalistic, that there is no God, no guided anything, is the explanation of things that appear to be designed but really arose out of purely mechanistic natural processes. So Paley's divine watchmaker kind of fell on hard times with the ascendancy of naturalistic Darwinism, so to speak. Which, again, was challenged, though, in the last 20, 30 years by people like biochemist Michael Behe, who started talking about this concept of irreducible complexity, that certain things that we learned when we started learning more about the cell and what's going on in there, the micro machines that exist at a cellular level that, in the time of Charles Darwin, they thought the cell was a ball of jello. We didn't know about all the things we know about DNA and different mitochondria.
And we know it's not now.
Yeah.
Just to clarify,
it could be jello.
It's not jello, right?
Yeah.
And this is the difference between us, Reed. I'm learning. So
the cell is not jello.
The cell is not jello. I'm taking notes.
Jelly or anything. Yeah. There's all this stuff going on that we can see now. And so Michael Behe, he was a biochemistry chemist and professor, said there are certain things that all have to be there for these microscopic machines to work. And to imagine them coming into being by step mutation and natural selection is very hard to imagine, because if it doesn't have all the pieces, it doesn't work in full. And we see things like this, like the functioning of the eye, right? How does the eye evolve? Now, of course, there are all arguments and answers to all this stuff, but irreducible complexity, all parts are necessary, or the part doesn't work, is an argument people have been making to say, hey, maybe there is a designer, right? And then specified complexity. And this gets into information theory, that now we know when someone says that DNA is a code, right? That it encodes for certain things, that our genome and our sequencing creates everything that happens at a macro level happens at this biochemical level, and that there's actual information, right, in this code. And so information comes from minds, not from random processes. Right. So there's some really good mathematical arguments being done about specified complexity. These things have to be, or they won't. And then finally, in design, there is some really good thinking. I'm just giving you guys some words. You can Google them, man. You can find stuff on this. And the anthropic principle. That anthro, meaning man, human beings, the idea that the universe appears to be designed, if we can use the word, fine-tuned, to not only permit life, but for the emergence of intelligent life, down to the very constants of physics, right? They couldn't be different by at least a tiniest bit, or life would, as we know it, could not and would not exist. And, you know, people who aren't committed to, say, propositions ahead of time that God can't exist, makes one wonder if this universe is fine-tuned to exist, and for us to exist, that it maybe was done on purpose, right? Yeah. And of course, you know, this is the big discussion in 20th century physics. If you saw the movie on Oppenheimer, right, there was a lot of discussion of this due to quantum mechanics. We won't get in that, Jesse. But anyway, that the world, and it is, seems to be a fix. And that's why, you know, the whole quote from Einstein, he didn't believe God plays dice with the universe, that it's not random or a chaos. There's actually a configuration to it, and it was made to be what it is. And it could have been different, but it's not. So it seems to permit life. Now, people try to get around that by conjecturing or imagining a multiverse. We love multiverses now in comic books and sci-fi movies and poor TV shows like The Flash. No, I'm just kidding. My kids love The Flash, so they would get on me for that comment. But the multiverse and Spider-Verse, there's parallel universes, there's multiverses. Universes could pop into existence all the time. So this one looks totally improbable to be what it is. But if you had a bunch of them, maybe we can fix the probabilities, but it doesn't. So the anthropic principle that the universe appears designed with exact physical constants to permit life and intelligent life seems to have held strong. Now, there's been 20th century atheists who have converted in light of this.
Yeah, I was going to say, in my experience as a man on the street,
Anthony Flew was a big atheist guy who, you know, became a theist by the end. Because of this.
I think the fine tuning of the universe and these arguments, I think, carry more weight than maybe I even remember when I was first kind of coming to Christ. You know, it does seem, and I don't know if that is a kind of almost a scientism, where if there's a scientific principle behind this, that you can, you're showing me the fine tuning, you're showing me the irreducible complexity of the cell. Like, I trust the person in the white lab coat.
That's right. That's right.
You know, but for whatever, I mean, I think it's compelling to me.
It's interesting, Jesse, because, and guys, this is very important, because remember, when we want to live amongst people, we want to share our life, we want to share the gospel, we want to listen to them, we want to help them deconstruct or disrupt, give good answers. Listen, when we talk about Alcindor, remember, people are different. There are a lot of people that believe in like magic crystals and dragons and stuff, and they have no problem with believing in miracles or gods or goddesses. Man, they believe everything. So man, you just talk about Jesus and his uniqueness, and you maybe get right at it. There are other people that look for more kind of scientific or philosophical reasons, right? And so I'm not going to do some big scientific argument with someone who doesn't even care about that. But for some people, it really matters that they have to have an intellectual respectability to what they believe, and they will have to ask those questions. And those kind of arguments are good for them. And that's why I think it's important, right, to have the philosophical versions that have some rigor, and then also just the hey, things seem to be designed and purposeful. DNA, cells, it seems like there's a mind behind it. You can talk as simply as that, or get into the more higher level philosophical scientific discussions. So first one, we're here. cosmological. Second one, things seem designed and purposeful, right? Design arguments. And then thirdly, there seems to be, and I think this is one of my favorite ways to talk to people, Jesse, there seems to be a moral nature to reality. This has become more helpful in our day because people care about evil doing and injustice and all the crap people do to each other. And people are mad about it, and people seem to think that there is some real right and wrong that they're appealing to. And when you do that, it puts you very much in a universe designed and purposed, because morality has to do with value and goodness, and that is very, very hard simply to derive atheistically or by science alone. We did a whole series, guys, if you want to go back and look at the book Science and the Good by Hunter and Nedeleski. We talked about that for several months, right, Jesse? But the moral arguments, how about you read that C.S. Lewis quote for us? This is from Mere Christianity.
I'd love to read this because I'm so glad you included this. When I was a teenager, I read Mere Christianity, and I wasn't against God. I was pretty convinced. I grew up Roman Catholic and had a kind of conception of
something there, yeah.
But this was so compelling, this particular quote, so I'm glad to read it.
Yeah.
This is from Lewis, Mere Christianity. My argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? If the whole show was bad and senseless from A to Z, so to speak, why did I, who was supposed to be part of the show, find myself in such a violent reaction against it?
Shaking your fist at the evil, so to speak, right?
Of course, I could have given up my idea of justice by saying it was nothing but a private idea of my own, but if I did that, then my argument against God collapsed too. For the argument depended on saying the world was really unjust, not simply that it did not happen to please my fancies. Thus, in the very act of trying to prove that God did not exist, in other words, that the whole of reality was senseless, I found I was forced to assume that one part of reality, namely my idea of justice, was full of sense. If the whole universe has no meaning, we should never have found out that it has no meaning. Just as, if there were no light in the universe, and therefore no creatures with eyes, we should have never known it was dark. Dark would be without meaning.
Okay. So probably the most strenuously articulated argument against the idea of a good creator God is the problem of evil, looking at the suffering of the world, which is massive and varied, and saying, well, how could there be something if this? And so Lewis had that feeling because he converted from atheism in his life to agnosticism and then became a Christian. He would say, man, this world seems cruel and unjust. And he's like, what am I talking about? Right? Yeah. Because if you don't believe in those categories as real, then you're just saying, I don't like vanilla ice cream and you like chocolate ice cream. And that we're really just talking about stuff that fits our fancies. We're not talking about something really unjust and evil that should be changed, ought to be changed. We're just talking about opinions about our experience. And that's not usually what people mean when they're railing about whatever ism is that makes us angry, right? That have been done on the earth. So Lewis is really great. We'll put that quote in the show notes for you guys. If you haven't read Mere Christianity, it's a wonderful read. This was certainly written right after World War II. Is that right, Jesse?
So he was giving lectures during World War II, I think. That's right. I think the BBC. Right.
So on the radio.
It was written after.
Radio?
I think it's because he was giving them in a serial lecture on the radio on BBC.
Yeah. And they turned it into the book. So if you haven't read that, and I think that context historically is important.
Yeah.
Because if you're saying, well, you don't know real suffering, C.S. Lewis, well, no, they were in the largest calamity of destruction of human life, where specifically in Europe, where cities were bombed into oblivion, right? So certainly wrestling with those issues. Now, in terms of philosophy, Jesse, there are really short, clear arguments. The one I really am drawn to, again, William Lane Craig uses this one. He says, if God does not exist, then objective moral values do not exist. In other words, when we say something is objectively morally good or objectively good, that means something is good or right, even if no human brain conceives of it as such. So, thought experiment, for example, if I don't want to use too contemporary example. Okay, so if the in a genocidal war. Okay, two people have different ideas and they're killing each other. So say one side wipes the other side out completely and convinces everyone that genocide is right in their society. It still doesn't make it right. Or more, so if the Nazis had won World War II in Lewis's time and convinced everyone that, say, like destroying and killing all the Jewish people was right, even if everyone's brain conceived of it as right, it doesn't make it right.
Yep.
And if you say morality is that way, or even if you admit it could possibly be that way, you have to then say that's very hard to sustain if there is no standard outside of ourselves.
Yep.
And that's certainly what God would say. So if God does not exist, then objective moral values do not exist, meaning something is right or wrong, whether we believe it or not. Okay? Second premise here would be, well, objective moral values do exist, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes people are so committed to this that you have to kind of shock folks. And so I've used examples like, hey, if somebody thought boiling babies for fun was good for him because that's his opinion and he likes it, is he wrong? Well, if he's wrong, he's wrong everywhere.
Yeah.
And if morality is that way, objective moral values do exist, right? Then we're dealing with a moral universe with morality coming to us, not us just making it up, as it were, as we go. So if God does not exist, objective moral values do not exist, but objective moral values do exist. Therefore, God exists. This is actually a deductive argument, Jesse. It's called modus tollens in Latin. It's basically saying if P, then Q, not Q, therefore not P, for philosophy nerds out there. Because the premises are true, the conclusion must follow. So for someone to deny this, they have to explain how objective moral values exist apart from any source outside of ourselves, and relativism does not emerge. So in other words, like, most of the conversations today is that morals are relative to cultures, and different cultures have different ideas, different loves, different values. One culture says this is right, another culture says that is right, which on a base level is true. There are differences, right? But at the same time, is there no transcultural moral values that we'd all be held to account for? For instance, hey, we just boil babies for fun in our culture.
Our culture does that.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, and the importance of this, if there are no objective moral values outside of ourselves, we cannot advocate for real moral change in any significant way. So, for instance, if the majority says that Jim Crow racism in the South is correct, who are we to say they're wrong? Well, we certainly can say they're wrong. Yeah. And certainly Martin Luther King Jr., letting from Birmingham jail, appeals to.
But you have to appeal.
Higher morality.
Right, to an objective higher morality.
Yeah. Of course, Dr. King's appealing to a morality that's based in God, right? The God is the source of moral goodness. Now, that's a philosophical argument. Jesse, there is a very fun, popular level way of talking to people that I've done this all the time, and with people who have various intellectual interests, so to speak. And so it's very common for us to be aware, right, that we are not perfect. At least the phrase "nobody's perfect" or "I'm not a perfect person," right, is understandable, reasonable, and people use it still all the time. So I've kind of said, hey, just by asking question, you ask your friend, I was like, hey, do you believe that you're a perfect person? Almost everyone, unless they're a sociopath, is going to say no. And then my question is like, well, what do we mean?
How do you know?
How do you know? What does it mean that I'm not perfect?
Yeah.
Like, do I fall short of something? Like, is it just like saying nobody is use our magic word, nothing? Nobody is nothing. Is that what we're saying? Or are we saying nobody is perfect? So what if someone is, right? It would certainly make sense of this intuition that we have that we're not perfect. It certainly would make sense that we're saying a meaningful sentence that makes sense. It's clear. It's accurate. I know that nobody, all these human beings, at least all these fools that I hang out with, knowing my own heart, right? Knowing my children, we are not perfect. We fall short. What is that, right? Wouldn't it make a lot of sense if something or someone is, right? And if that's the case, then, well, who's the candidates for that? Well, that's what we mean. In the biblical tradition, the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, right? Nobody is good from God but God, right? Yeah. The goodness and perfection lies in a person, and actually who we could relate to, and as a human being, someone who is perfect would seem pretty awesome, right? We'd see that's maybe worthy of worship. And I find that using that don't do this for your philosophy professor. They're going to blah, 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 blah. But man on the street, man, yeah, I'm not perfect. You're not perfect. What do we mean by that? Well, how about we know the one that is, right? So those Jesse, we're here. Cosmological things seem designed. Teleological, moral arguments for the existence of God and moral nature of the universe. I think that 20th century atheism realized that specifically people like Jean-Paul Sartre and the existentialists, he wrote a play called No Exit about life. We wrote another thing called Nausea, where people said, well, life, if God is gone, right? If there is no God, there is no ultimate purpose to this world. There is no ultimate meaning to the world. And that's where people would say stuff like, well, the only question left is why shouldn't you kill yourself, right? Yeah. Philosophers, right? Geez, great job, philosophy. No wonder you're getting cut in all the universities of America, right? Do something helpful for us, philosophers. And so the idea that life is meaningless makes life very difficult, particularly when you want things like hope. That seems to be an essential ingredient. When you need things like justice, when you need things to make sense, that life isn't just a fake, an absurdity, right? And so this is important because if God exists, right, there is justice, there is purpose to human life, and the implications of life after death, I think, are very important.
Yeah.
Because think about it, Jesse. If there is no life to come, there is no judgment or justice ultimately outside of the human courts of affairs, right? What does it mean? Did someone who lives their life as a saint or a Hitler, it literally makes no difference to them once they're dead. That's why a lot of these heinous evildoers go and shoot up stuff and then off themselves because they think it's an out. Well, if God exists, there's no out there, right? There is ultimate accountability after death even. And so we seem to need justice. And it seems like, hey, what if that stuff is real? If that stuff is real, it seems to be that God would be the ultimate judge of reality, right? Finally, Jesse, as we wrap up today, we won't go too long here, is that you guys, man, if you're a follower of Jesus, if you know God personally through a relationship with Jesus Christ, we should not back away from that when someone asks us the question, why do you believe God is real? There's a beautiful answer in that I know God and he's changed my life. I've come to know God through Jesus Christ, who's forgiven my sins, made me a new person, given me hope and a future. My family, I have 5 generations of faithful followers of Jesus Christ who know God, and I've seen the beauty of that. Your testimony is, hopefully, one of the reasons we have to believe, right? That there is a immediate experience of God. John Calvin spoke of this, right? Who was a super theological nerdy guy, right? Pastor, really deep, wrote big fat books when he was barely a teen, out of his teenage years. But he even spoke clearly of what he called the sensus divinitatis. Why don't you read that quote from the Institutes for us?
Yeah, that there exists in the human mind, and indeed by natural instinct, some sense of deity we hold to be beyond dispute, since God himself, to prevent any man from pretending ignorance, has endued all men with some idea of his Godhead. This is not a doctrine which is first learned at school, but one as to which every man is, from the womb, his own master, one which nature herself allows no individual to forget.
People know that there's something there. This even is to the atheist who's mad at God and the conception of God that he denies is even real, but certainly messes up his life and makes him very, very angry. And then as we look, we say, hey, maybe there seems that there is a God. God himself has decided to make himself known to human beings. This is where the beauty of Jesus himself comes to us, Jesse, that God did not want to be known simply through abstract theological or philosophical principles or big fat books, that God became one of us. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we saw his glory. Jesus said, if you've seen me, you've seen God. God in a meat suit, like my friend Eric Mason used to say, the incarnate, the incarnation, that God became flesh in Jesus Christ, lived a life of beauty and goodness, showing us what God is, and then died, crucified under Pontius Pilate for our sins, and that our claim isn't that dead people rise, right? We know dead people die and they stay dead. But our claim is that God raised Jesus from the dead as his fingerprint and stamp on human history with this profound event that marks the high top of human history. The perfect man enfleshed, the perfect man wrongfully and justly killed for us so that our injustice and sins could be forgiven. And then God vindicating for our justification, raising him gloriously from the dead, Jesse. And that too is why we believe in God.
Amen.
The Gospel Underground is a podcast produced with Jesse's Fly Black Bonhoeffer House sweatshirt in partnership with the Bonhoeffer House. Review us on Apple Podcasts. I was saying iTunes forever, Jesse. You never correct me. Apple Podcasts, Googles, and Spotify. Put us some stars up. Send your comments, feedback, questions to us that you might want us to take up to info@gospelunderground.org. We are a dialogue taking place out in them streets where God is real, Jesse.
Amen.
And wants to be known and know you through Jesus Christ. Peace.